Joining us now is Mick Mulvaney, former acting chief of staff in the Trump White House, who testified before the January 6th committee yesterday. We appreciate you being with us. It's not often we get someone at your level who just appeared before the committee. So if you can, just describe the process inside that room.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for having me. It was extraordinarily professional. If you've ever been through a deposition, it was very similar to that, a deposition from a civil case. 4 or 5 lawyers from the committee, lasted about 2.5 hours. Very well prepared lawyers, very courteous, no animosity at the table. The one thing I guess that was missing, John, was that if you go to a deposition, there's going to be another side, and there was no other side. They were all questions by the committee designed to try and find out stuff that might make President Trump look bad. No one there asking the other side of the questions that might make President Trump look good. But that's fine. It was not a fight. It was a free-flowing discussion of information that I thought was helpful. I would have given the exact same answers, obviously, if there had been folks there from the other side of the political spectrum. So it just reaffirms in my mind that the committee is politically biased. There's no question about that. The structure is politically biased, but the information that you're getting is from Republicans like myself who are testifying. I wasn't under oath, but you still can't lie to Congress anyway. That's still a crime. So I think the information that they're getting is good and sound information.
Were there any members who asked you questions?
Yeah, there were a couple. The lawyers were there in person. There were a couple members who participated virtually, and Liz Cheney was one of those. She asked a couple of questions. A couple other members came and went during the hearing, but they didn't ask any questions.
So what did they want to know from you specifically? Because I said you were the former acting chief of staff in the Trump White House, but that was well before January 6th. At this time, between the election and January 6th itself, you were special envoy for Northern Ireland. So what do they want to know from you?
Yeah, 3 different things. Sort of, why did I communicate? Why did I say what I said? I sent some tweets and some texts on January 6th. They want to talk about that. I was also fairly heavily involved in the Trump campaign. I was the head of Catholics for Trump in 2020, and they wanted to know about the discussions I'd had leading up to the election day, and then the discussions right after the election day. And then, interestingly, there were some questions toward the end about general questions about how a White House might run. And now, granted, every White House is different, every chief of staff is different, but they wanted to know the process, for example, on how visitors would come see the president, or how would a chief of staff typically try and include or exclude people from meetings with the president. So clearly they're trying to figure out more about how it is perhaps Rudy Giuliani or Sidney Powell got the access to the president of the United States that they did, how folks like Mike Lindell had access, the role of people like Peter Navarro, that sort of inner circle of people that have been described by others as the crazies. How did they get the access that they did when they did?
In that case, you'd be something of an expert witness, not an eyewitness, but someone who can tell you about processes. I do want to ask, apparently they specifically wanted to ask you about a text that you had sent in the week after Election Day to campaign officials. Oh, and RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel. You said, "I'm getting this sinking feeling that everyone other than me thinks we have lost this election. I'm out there telling everyone we haven't. If people know something I do not, I would appreciate it if you would let me know. It is better for me not to do TV and keep my mouth shut than to do TV and say we have a chance when people in the know that we do not."
Yeah, that was very interesting. They did not get that from me, which means they got it from someone else to whom I sent it, Ronna McDaniel, Jared Kushner, somebody, because they did not get that text from me. And I'd forgotten that I had sent that text, but I clearly remember what it was all about. That was in the days after the election, so not the weeks. This is the days after the election. I was spending a good bit of time watching the race in Arizona, and I remember being on a phone call when Ronna McDaniel made a sort of a throwaway line that there was no way we could win Arizona. And I was sitting there doing television on social media talking about how I thought we still had a good chance in Arizona. The election there had not yet been finalized or certified. So yeah, I was a little surprised that I was sitting there defending the president and saying we had a chance in Arizona. And there's folks inside the campaign and inside the RNC who had apparently decided that there was no way we could win Arizona. I thought that was that's one of the times that I felt like I had been misled by the campaign, and the committee wanted to talk about that a good bit.
That's interesting. So just to be clear, because I haven't seen that text message either. They showed it to you in the context of after you sent that text, you no longer believed that Trump had a chance to win in Arizona. Those other people there basically convinced you, nah, this isn't going to happen.
Yeah, and they asked me a question, when did you decide that the president, had lost the election? And I gave the answer that I think a lot of Republicans gave, which is that I don't remember coming to a specific time when I thought it's over, but certainly by the time I got that text, I was starting to wonder about the information that the campaign was giving, not only to me, but to the public.
All right, I want to ask you about a major development overnight. CNN, it was a CNN exclusive. We were the first to report that the Department of Justice, the federal investigators, are building a case that would basically get around executive privilege and force Trump advisors from the Trump White House to testify. They're going to take it to court. If the former president claims executive privilege, they're preparing to take it to court and say it does not apply here. I want to get your opinions on executive privilege writ large in a second. First, though, what do you think this tells us about where the federal investigators are in their probe?
Yeah, when you put this together, John, with the information that we learned over the weekend, that Mark Short and the president's, Mark Short was obviously the vice president's chief of staff, then also the vice president's chief legal counsel had been subpoenaed to testify and did testify to a federal criminal grand jury here in Washington, D.C. on Friday. Put that together with the information that you've just discovered, and what you're sort of seeing is evidence, indirect evidence, that the Department of Justice investigation into January 6th, which we know is going on because they've charged over 800 people, I think, with crimes related to the attack on the Capitol. But the fact that Mark Short was there, the lawyer was there, now this information that you've presented in the last couple of hours gives some evidence that the DOJ investigation is now moving closer and closer to the White House, that they're starting to talk to people inside the Trump orbit, as opposed to just the rioters themselves, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. So I think that that's probably the most significant piece of information we have in the last couple of days regarding the DOJ investigation.
If federal investigators are taking on executive privilege, who should be worried in the Trump White House?
He's not worried. Nobody should be worried. I mean, telling the truth is fine. I think what people don't understand about executive privilege is it doesn't allow you not to testify. I could have invoked an executive privilege yesterday. I could have relied on it if they'd asked me questions that I felt or my lawyer felt would have crossed the line. But it doesn't mean I don't get to show up. You don't. If they ask you the question is today, Friday, you don't get to invoke executive privilege. There's certain communications that are protected. Now, there's also some history in our legal jurisprudence about how to get through that executive privilege. They go all the way back, I think, to Watergate. So, yes, you're right. It is the fact that the DOJ seems to be preparing that sort of line of reasoning tells you that they want to now talk to people who might be in a position to invoke executive privilege, and they want to prevent that from happening. But again, I'm more interested in the truth. That's what I think this should all be about. I think it's what it is all about. And if there's folks who have information about January 6th and the run-up to it, there should be no difficulty with anybody, and no one should be worried about telling the truth.
If the interest is in the truth, and again, to be clear, I think to be technical here, it's only, if you believe this, a former president or president who can invoke executive privilege. You can refer to the fact that the former president invoked executive privilege there. But that's a way not to answer questions. Are you suggesting that you would prefer executive privilege not be at play here and they just answer the questions?
Well, keep in mind, it's very interesting, and I learned this because of my testimony yesterday. The privilege actually lies with the current executive. The committee presented me with a letter from the Biden White House saying that they were not going to invoke executive privilege on my testimony. We could have still pushed back. My lawyer and I had decided that if the committee had asked us questions specifically that we thought got too close to my private communications with the president, we were going to fight that. But in the eyes of the committee, which I assume has some basis in law, the executive privilege actually lies with the current executive and not the past.
Has the federal government, has the federal investigators reached out to you at all yet?
No, and I don't expect they will. Again, as you mentioned in the opening, I was long gone from the White House by January 6th. Yes, I was involved with the campaign, but I was not involved with the planning for the riots or any planning for the rally on that day or the communications that were involved with that.
Last time we spoke, we talked about the Secret Service text messages that apparently had been deleted. And I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you basically said, it's weird, but not necessarily nefarious. It raises questions, but it isn't necessarily nefarious. Now, the Washington Post reports overnight that there are also apparently some text messages from acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security Ken Cuccinelli and the acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf. They have text messages that are also gone. How does that affect your view now of the situation?
Again, I'm one of those people who's slow to judgment. I'd like to have facts before me before I make a final decision. But to your original point, it is weird, and it's getting a little bit weirder. Keep in mind, there's a good chance, and I don't have any information. I'm not talked to Chad or Ken about this, but I know that when I was in the White House, I had two phones. I had my personal phone and I had a work phone. And when I left the White House, I had to leave my work phone there. So if the same was true with Ken, then he would have to turn over that work phone to somebody else, and he would not have been in control of it since he left the administration. So again, does it look weird from the outside? Does it look somewhat nefarious? Yes, but I just encourage folks to look. There's plenty of time to get the right information here before we make any final decisions about this. This is one of the most important sort of investigations that we'll probably undertake in Washington, D.C. in my lifetime. We need to make sure we take the time to do it properly.